Hello, welcome to this Belbin webinar where we'll be looking and discussing why some teams succeed and others fail. We've started just a few seconds early to give everybody time to get in, have their cup of tea, get themselves settled, ready for the next 45 minutes or so where myself and Victoria will be talking all about teams. As you do enter the StreamYard platform, or if you're on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, wherever you may be joining us from, please do say hello in the comments. Let us know who you are, where you're joining us from. Tracy's there in the comments as well, just to see you all. Please do, because it's always wonderful to know that we're not just talking to space, that we do have people with us. It's always a good thing. Okay. Hello, Mia from Finland. Wonderful. As I always say at the beginning of these webinars, it's wonderful to see such a global presence because teamwork is important wherever you are. It's not something that's unique here to Cambridge. It's to everybody, obviously, worldwide. Hi, Rob, joining us from Stamford in Lincolnshire. Hayley from Skelmersdale. Brilliant. Cara from Florida, US. Lovely to meet you. Hi, Valerie from Israel. I'm not making this up. Okay, it's actually going through as we speak. We've got Moya, hi there from Cardiff. I've got Emma from the West Midlands, Julia from Frimley. Thank you so much for joining us. What we'd love to do is make this an interactive session. We've called it a discussion. And I'll tell you what, it can just be a discussion between myself and Vicky. We've been discussing nothing but this for the last few days, but we'd really like to make it interactive, so please do join us. Any questions that you may have, I'll try and make it relative. I'll try and get the right question at the right time. If we don't worry. Tracy, our marketing manager, is in the background and she will be checking that we've answered everything before we leave you. Hi, Rosanna from Uruguay. Hi, lovely to see you. Natasha from Cheshire. We've got Renu from India. Tamsin, hi there. Don't worry about the apologies, but thank you. Hi, Kate. Lovely to see you. And Roberto from Spain. Great that you're here too, Stuart. I'm going to miss people out if I start trying to do the whole thing, and then that doesn't work well, does it? Okay, let's get started. Why some teams succeed and others fail. A discussion. My name's Jo Keeler. I'm the Managing Director here at Belbin, and I'm joined today by the fantastic and amazing, and all of those words, Victoria Brown, who's the Head of R&D here at Belbin. And Vicky has been with us for 18 years now, and her role is not only to check all the stats to make sure that we're still measuring what we're meant to be measuring, but also looking at that broader context. How can we use our knowledge of Belbin? How are other people using it? And how can we use that data to truly understand the challenges teams are facing and how Belbin can help with that? We're really discussing this because Vicky found an incredible article by McKinsey. And this article was brilliant because as part of Vicky's role, it's to find out what the wider community is talking about in terms of teams. Well, you carry on, Vicky. What happened when you found this article?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. So, yeah, it was, I think, in our office, a sort of an interesting moment of, wow, it's fantastic that the spotlight is on teams and that we're talking about the importance of teams from a business perspective. But there was also a bit of a cry of, oh my goodness, we knew this, we've been saying this for a long time. And so hence sort of wanting to share that message and make sure that people know where Belbin comes from and why we're talking about these kind of insights. So really useful, I think, to have this this take on teams and the importance of that sort of scientific approach to teamwork that we'll go on to.
Brilliant. The title of the talk is article, is Go Teams. When teams get healthier, the whole organisation benefits. Now, what we will be doing is putting all of the links to all of the studies that we talk about in the second email that you will get following this webinar. The first one is an automated one from StreamYard. The second one will be either this afternoon or tomorrow. And whenever we mention something, we will put a link into it. So don't worry, you don't have to start Googling. So we found this article. Vicky found it, she shared it, and there was a collective, really? Oh my goodness, but we know that. And really that is the basis of this webinar. It's the basis of a series of articles that Vicky has then gone on to write about really that overlap between the myths that McKinsey were dispelling and also the research that was done at Belbin.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we wanted to talk, didn't we, a little bit more about this question and why it was asked and how it was answered. So hopefully that's something we can move on to.
Perfect. Yes, we can. So that's setting the scene. That's why we're here today. So what did McKinsey say? What were the things that they brought to the fore when they're talking about teams? What were the key parts of the article?
Yeah, so I think sort of setting the background, sort of looking at teams, they talk about teams generating value as a primary unit of performance. And I think this really important shift that we're seeing away from teamwork, from being something sort of fuzzy or nice to have, something sort of about the way that people get along, to actually recognizing this is a unit of performance. It's something that drives business value. It's something that businesses really need to be concerned with, and therefore that we can't address this using intuition. It isn't enough to sort of, as Meredith said many times, put a group of people together and hope for the best. Really, we need to have data to understand why some teams succeed and others fail. But happily, we have that data from some research that was done a while ago.
Wonderful. I love the article. It's one of those ones where you start highlighting everything. They really go on to say that team effectiveness is less art, it is more science. And that's where the cry was coming out. Yeah, we know what that science is. Let's share that. And going back to this what does make teams work? You know, it's all art, it's all a feel, it's all a gut, it's all intuition. McKinsey says that team success or failure is often attributed to individuals, particularly the team leader, as the main driver of performance, or to some nebulous sense of the team chemistry, which they've done the quotation marks there. And I've highlighted here, as with most things, hope is not a strategy. We need to do more than just, well, we've got some brilliant people together. That's fine. Let's hope they work well together. There's more to it than that. And this is obviously the work that's being carried out by Meredith Belbin and his team. But okay, so we've got why we're here talking to you today, that the article that really prompted that and some of the key drivers there. But really, let's start by understanding why teams are important.
Absolutely.
How can we do that better than talking about Anthony Jay? Anthony Jay was quite a powerhouse back in the 70s. He wrote Yes Minister. He has a CVO, a CBE. He has got all of those initials after his name. He also wrote quite a few books on management, and he was asked to provide the foreword for management teams, why they succeed or fail, which was first published in 1981. I'll just say that again, 1981. And in the foreword, which actually what you could do is just read the foreword and we'll just go off, have a cup of tea and you'll come back again, because it gives that why teams are important so clearly, so succinctly. And he says here, it is not the individual, but the team that is the instrument of sustained and enduring success. Quite relevant now, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we were talking earlier, weren't we, Jo, saying that a lot of the issues that we face are complex, and organisations need teams. But what we need are real teams, rather than individuals trying to work solo and burning out and trying to be incredibly productive. Imagine if we had real teams to replace sort of a bunch of individuals trying, pedaling really, really hard, but not getting there. If we could help people to work more effectively, you've got that team, as Anthony Jay says, a team can renew and regenerate itself by new recruitment. It can find within itself all those conflicting characteristics that cannot be united in any single individual. It can build up a store of shared and collectively owned experience, information, and judgment. I love this. And it can be in 10 places at once. You know, how often do we hear people say, oh, there's too much going on, there's too much work, I need to be in 10 places at once. And it's really getting this, the team sort of work together collectively and understanding the team, I think, as a separate organism, not as a group of individuals. You know, it's not necessarily the individuals are the building blocks. We put those all, paste those all together, and we have a team. It's starting with the team and understanding what are those characteristics. I think that's the key, and that's
Absolutely.
where we come in.
And that is exactly where we come in. So why did Belbin get involved? Why did we start, again, the royal we, this research? Why were we interested in teams? I'm going to talk a little bit about the Industrial Training Research Unit now. Whilst I'm doing that, Vicky, I don't know if somebody can pop along and just help with the microphone because it's a little bit muffled. A few people can't hear properly.
I'm just, so it's coming through here. So is that any better for those listening? If not, I'll try and switch my audio, but
okay, Tricia, Rob, can we, is that any better? Can we just quickly check? I don't know, you're not speaking now. I suppose people can't tell.
Carry on in the meantime. I'm projecting.
Project, Vicky, project. That's what we need to do. Oh, no, it's not really better. I'll talk about this next bit. You go and get your thing sorted out. Fabulous. Yeah. Brilliant. Can I just say at this point that this is where teamwork is really important. So Vicky and I have worked together now for over 18 years. My top strengths are shaper, resource investigator, coordinator, and Vicky's top strengths are implementer, completer, finisher, specialist. Between us, we have 6 of those team roles actually covered, which is fantastic. But it's a relationship that has to be kept working because we see things from completely different viewpoints. However, what you're benefiting from today is my 4th team role of specialist. So we're going to start geeking out a little bit here when we talk about some of this research. So please forgive us. I'm going to have to hit myself and make sure that I get back into coordinator if we go to narrow down what we're talking about. Okay, so we've talked about the McKinsey article. We've talked about, why teams are important. It's critical, especially nowadays when we all are suffering perhaps from recruitment freezes and from things that are going on generally in the business world. Those people who are there, it is critically important that they're working well as a team for your companies and your businesses to be effective. That there's no argument. But why are Belbin there? I'm showing this because I love this picture so much. I found it. We cleared out my office the other day and we found an article all about the Industrial Training Research Unit in Cambridge. And what we have there is Meredith Belbin and his wife, Dr. Eunice Belbin, OBE. Now, the Industrial Training Research Unit, I'm going to talk about only very briefly, but I think it sets the scene. It wasn't there just for Belbin team roles. It wasn't there just as research as team. It was part of UCL. And it was there to look at training. How do we train? It was providing the link from research to business consultancy. They worked with the post office. They worked with so many organizations producing leaflets and booklets, as they did in the day, about training in the clothing industry, training the adult worker, basing stuff on the post office. It was full of incredibly intelligent people who were working in this field, and actually only a small slither of it actually came into being about the teams. But that's why Henley approached Industrial Training Research Unit, which was based in Cambridge, although part of UCL. There was a little bit of controversy there. And they were approached because of this link that they had. They were quite respected in the industry of this link between the theory, but also how do we apply that to business. Dr. Eunice Belbin she ran the organisation. I'll just say that again. Dr. Eunice Belbin chaired the Industrial Training Research Unit. She was in charge. And her husband, Meredith Belbin, was a mere employee. I feel I need to say that. I don't know why. She's no longer with us, unfortunately. I feel I need to be her voice with that. So what did we do? Well, we worked with Henley. Let's set the scene here a little bit. So at Henley Management College, what happened is that they were concentrating on improving managers. They were looking at the ways in which managers could become, high-flying managers. They did this by syndicate working. So syndicate working was what Henley really focused on, how people learn by working together. And they had managers from all walks of life were sent to Henley. They had scientists, they had bankers, they had a whole range of people. They had civil servants, they had engineers, they had people with commercial experience. They were all practicing managers coming along at Henley because they were being, earmarked for the higher appointments in top management.
I mean, to say, though, you should say this is quite an international gathering as well. So I looked at one cohort that we had. We've got lots of brilliant archives with all of the people who are attending these courses. And we had one cohort, I counted, they had delegates from UK, Ireland, India, Nigeria, Iraq, Malaysia, South Africa, and Hong Kong, just on one group.
It's just incredible, isn't it, really? Back then, it was as with this webinar, it was a truly international cohort of managers. It wasn't just UK based. I think that was quite important. And what they looked at is, one of the reasons they contacted the Industrial Training Research Unit is because they had these really good managers. They were good. They were high-performing managers together. And they found that when they were working together with a game called the EME, the Executive Management game, is that they found that sometimes these teams worked brilliantly and sometimes they didn't. And they didn't understand because some managers who were individually able and impressive could be disappointing. And then they found less impressive managers when together were amazing. And they couldn't work out that as reason why that was. And as part of this game that they then put together, is that they found that they could actually have an outcome. So these managers were playing this game called the EME, and they were doing that. There was an outcome, and they're able to measure it. So what the Industrial Training Research Unit were there to do was to try and make that link between the input and the output. What was going on to make some of these teams successful? What was it? And of course, they made some changes as they went through. What they realized with the EME was actually that it was a little bit academic. There were 6 people. It took a week. Am I right, Vicky? It was a whole week, wasn't it, to go through? And they found that although it was very useful, it didn't really mirror what was going on in industry at the time. And there was a little bit of criticism because of that. So they changed it. They changed it to a different business game called Teamopoly, which was just a day. There were fewer people, 4 as opposed to 6. And there was a bit more real, true life, as my kids used to say when they were younger, because they introduced this element of collaboration, negotiation, and communication skills, which weren't actually as evident when playing the original exercise. So they looked at the relationship between the input and the output. They had Teamopoly, they had the EME, they had this game, this vehicle to be able to get to their output, but they needed more data. So what they did is they used the CATL 16PF, not the 16PF, which is now free and you can just download, not that one, the Roman CATL 16PF as a measure of personality. They used the Watson-Glaser critical thinking analysis, which was a measure of intelligence. They used the PPQ, the personal preference questionnaire, which was a measure of values, which they put together specifically for this exercise. And they used something called Bayes analysis. And Bayes analysis is something where you observe what's happening. So they had all of this data to collect whilst this game was going on so that they could try and work out what was important with all of this data to ensure that teams were successful. What was that link? Okay, Vicky, can you hear? I can't see you, but are you there?
I am, Josie. You can bring me back to the stage because I think I'm somehow not on the stage at the moment. So we've got some gremlins this week.
Okay, I can't do that, unfortunately, because it's just saying that I can only
Okay.
remove you. I can't
Oh, it's
actually
okay. As long as
put
you
you
can
on.
hear me,
We can
that's
hear you.
fine.
That's fine. Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, so I think the researchers then sort of did the natural thing that I think perhaps they would do in that situation, and what McKinsey sort of talk about in the article. Perhaps our instinct is to say, let's take lots of high performing individuals and put those individuals together. And as Meredith says, in a business simulation that's supposed to work for people who are clever, then the people, obviously with that sort of perhaps narrower definition that they had back then of clever that we don't so much have now, that those top performers should then be the highest performing teams. And McKinsey talked about this in their article as well. And it's their sort of myth number one that if you put all these top performers together, you don't necessarily get a high performing team. So what Meredith said is before we tinker with the team design, let's verify the basic principles. In the business simulation exercise that places an emphasis on cleverness, the cleverest teams should win. But he needed a way to, as Joe says, to be able to measure this. And so what he and his research team did, and he had, I believe, an anthropologist, an occupational psychologist, he had lots of really smart people sort of working together on this, was that they started observing the teams in great detail. And so they codified all of the kind of behaviors that they might see, all the sort of interactions that they might see. And every 30 seconds, they recorded this for each team. So this was sort of the original big data, if you like, pen and paper big data from the 1970s. You can imagine the amount of information that this would have amassed. But that was the beginning point, I think, for them, was sort of trying to uncover what was happening. So this is from our archive. This is one of the original observation sheets, not for those of you who know Belbin quite well, not the observer kind of observations that we talk about today, but just sort of codes what was going on in the room at that time. And you can see it sort of minute by minute accounts, and they're sort of looking for, are people sort of proposing ideas? Are they analysing? If they're having disagreements, what's happening? Who's speaking? And so they could then, once they had all this data, begin to sort of break down what constituted a successful interaction, a successful team experience. And that's, I think, really key. And we're going to come back to this, is that this was the starting point. It was answering the question. The ITRU was providing a link between the world of research and the world of business consultancy. So it was using the one to directly inform the other. And the idea at this point was, we've got a hypothesis. Our hypothesis is that clever people are going to do well. And so before we started to do anything with team design, let's work on that. It's important, I think, to reflect on this that Meredith talks about in management teams. That when we talk about high performers, I suppose what they were looking at here was people who had perhaps sort of done well within traditional education, who had the highest scores on this critical thinking appraisal. But Meredith actually makes the comment that our education system, as he calls it, unconscious training in anti-teamwork. So people who are traditionally sort of doing well and perhaps reaching these levels, certainly at that time, those who are top of the class, who have it within their reach, are continually being judged in terms of scholastic preeminence. So it's individual accomplishment, individual achievement, beating the next person, putting your ideas forward, your idea being the best. That kind of measure of individual success, coming top of the class. And actually then in a different context, that began to fall down. And so I think this was the point at which they started to unpick what do we actually mean by high performers, both for individuals, and what does that mean for teams?
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? I think that Meredith wrote that back in 1981, and I don't think things have changed massively since then. I do believe that our education system and life in general is who came top, and by doing that, there's a wonderful chapter in management teams when they talk about these high performers, these high intellect individuals, and they're saying actually that their intelligence actually nullified the teamwork. So you thought they'd be brilliant, but actually they weren't. And it was nullified due to this fact that they just could not work together because one had to always be better than the other. There's also a lot of other interesting work done when we're looking at these Apollo teams. And I'm sure, Vicky, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail as well, is it was really obvious when these teams were being put together by the other people, wasn't it, within the management college? It was really obvious, and people got a little bit annoyed by that sometimes. So it's obvious that you've put people together, but when they did it, it was quite interesting that how badly they kind of worked.
Absolutely, yes. So Meredith says that he took the opportunity to do that whenever he could, just to, again, that scientific rigor. If he had the opportunity to put these Apollo teams together, he would do that to sort of reinforce what he discovered. And they didn't always come last. There were sort of differing results. And he talks about the kind of occasions where they were able to sort of compensate for their shortcomings. But primarily what we see in Apollo teams, and we've got an article that is exclusively about Apollo teams that might be good to check out if you're interested. What he found was that Apollo teams tended to be good at debate, but it wasn't constructive debate. So the point of their debate was get my own idea across, argue for my idea, and sort of beat down any opposition. So that word critical, we're talking about the critical thinking appraisal. Meredith says, it was critical in terms of being analytical, but it was also critical in the other meaning of the word, which is to say, that they were good at criticizing. So they found they were sort of going round in circles with the debate, which caused lots of division in the team. They were frustrated when things weren't going the right way, so there was lots of blame. And that makes it difficult, as we know now when we talk about psychological safety. If you have lots of recriminations about why things are going wrong, it can be difficult for the team to progress. And there was lots of sort of conflict, but not necessarily the kind of conflict that could drive things forward. And actually, for the teams that recognised that was what was happening, they tried to sort of harmonise and avoid conflict, but that meant that they weren't necessarily taking forward the best ideas. So they couldn't, they basically couldn't, they were failing even though they were trying to succeed. And it's interesting, we'll sort of come on to that when they began to get more kind of consciousness about what was going on, about team design and composition, that kind of self-awareness came in. But certainly at the beginning, it was very much that they were sort of flailing around trying to find out why they weren't succeeding, because these were smart people and they probably wondered themselves why things weren't going the right way.
Yeah.
But I love this quote that we have up from Meredith, which is just it sums up, I think, quite well the research and the thinking behind it. Once our most promising hypothesis was out of the way, we could begin to look at what constitutes the ingredients for success. Now, if you were setting out to create a product and get it off to market and off you go, I don't think you would say this. This is someone who is trying to answer a question. And actually, throughout management teams, Meredith's absolutely thrilled when things went wrong because they learned something. And I think this is the kind of scientific rigor that you need. You need to be sort of looking for the truth, looking for an answer that's going to be helpful, rather than setting out with a particular framework and trying to push that and see how you can sort of monetize that. So, but this is the beginning of Belbin. We have this hypothesis. It doesn't work. Brilliant. Now we can begin to look at other things. And as you say, if you read the book, you can see this throughout. That actually he sort of rejoices in all of their failures, and it was it's lovely to read, I think, because it gives, or it should give us faith in the outcome, because I think the rigor was there. There wasn't necessarily a drive to sort of push one narrative, one solution over another.
It was scientific. It was people with curious minds, people who were intrigued as to why something happened. And like you said, who rejoiced when things didn't go the way they thought they would do, because they were learning. It was a constant learning cycle, wasn't it? I've just jumped in there, Vicky, because I've got, the bit I've got highlighted in the book that I desperately need to talk to people about. Is that we talk about Apollo teams, and people wonder why, when we put all those people with high intellect together and called them Apollo teams, where does the word Apollo come from? Well, when they were doing a lot of these, the games, the EME, and also Teamopoly, to be able to observe behaviours, to be able to get that output, and to be able to see what it was that the input that made that success, is that I used to put them in room 1, room 2, room 3, so it'd be group 1 and room 1, etc., etc. But they decided to make a change, and at the time it was the time of the moon landings, and that's why they called it the Apollo team, because they renamed the rooms, and these high intellect individuals happened to be told to go into the Apollo room at Henley. So that's why it was. But there's a little bit of a story there. I'm always like the little bit of the human touch is actually, I'm just going to just read this directly from management teams. Sometime after our experiments, the Apollo team was brought to life in a particularly ironic way. Dr. David Marriott from Australia and I had received a contract from NASA to provide an educational input into the performance of their teams. The key problem in the organisation was one of highly talented individuals failing to work as effectively as a team as the mission desired. So they were contacted by NASA. What happened next was a classic illustration of the Apollo effect. Amongst the individuals themselves, they could not even come to an agreement to go ahead with the seminar. So our work, designed to help them, was stopped before it could even start. Having already contracted to do the work, I was awarded a cancellation fee before even starting on the journey. So it's okay, he got paid. But I just think the irony there is fantastic. They had Apollo teams, and because of that, they couldn't arrange the seminar to actually happen. So another reason, it really reinforces that Apollo label, doesn't it? That we're actually, which was put on them. I think that's a great story there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go back. So McKinsey were talking about the fact that it's science, not an art, for teamwork. We've talked about the importance of teams, which is even more so now in the business climate that we are in. Where did Belbin come in? Well, as part of the Industrial Training Research Unit, they were asked by Henley to work out why some of their teams succeeded and why they failed. So they started with lots of hypotheses. The first one was putting together all of those with real high intellect together, because surely it was intellect that made teams successful. But for us mere mortals, we're lucky because it wasn't. And Meredith and his team rejoiced in the fact that their most promising hypothesis was out of the way. They could start looking again at what it was that made a team truly successful. They were constantly looking back at this. So where did they go next? What else do we need to impart during this webinar?
So the next stage, I think, as I say, was that the teams began to be aware of what was going on, and they were being observed. And the more sort of inquisitive amongst them thought, well, maybe we can use this information. And so they sort of approached the observers and said, what can you tell us about how our team works? What don't we have? And I think this is an early sort of version of a principle from team coaching, I think, Joe, isn't it? That the team sort of takes responsibility for its own growth and its own learning, and that they, as the individuals were trying to get to grips with this, the researchers were also beginning to put together the idea of these clusters of behaviour. So you can see some of the team roles here on the observation sheet, and so we're looking at those sort of contributions, but we're also trying to cluster those together so that we can begin to talk about useful ways of contributing to a team. And for those of you who are familiar, you'll see some of the team role abbreviations there. So those sort of things were happening in tandem, really, that the teams were trying to work on or increase their awareness, at least, of their collective strengths and their knowledge of their weaknesses, the things that they needed to cover, because they wanted to win, and that was the incentive. So it's quite an interesting sort of process, I think. And you were saying, Jo, weren't you, that one of the issues with the EME, the original game, was this sort of analysis. So you didn't have necessarily the rapport with between the teams and the people who were facilitating, and that actually this is more representative of business, that you find out what you don't know, and you use the resources available to you, and that's what they were starting to do.
Yeah, absolutely. In the original game that they played, which was a week long, there was somebody who played the role of banker, and they were needed at some point throughout the week because it's all about transaction, about buying and selling, and the business game. And they found that some people who were disengaged throughout the week would just go and find, who is this random person, here in this room, and they go and develop a relationship, a rapport. They then realised that they needed the banker, and they found actually that the people who'd had that rapport and relationship with the bank were given preferential treatment. And they said, this isn't fair. Why are these people getting preferential treatment? And they said, well, actually, this is what happens in business. It's all about, the relationships are really important. And that's one thing that did inform that change from the EME to the Teamopoly, which took that into consideration. It had that relationship element and that learning element in there as well. It's really quite important there. One thing that was also quite interesting is that we had this sense of understanding what was going on. These are bright managers, and they could sense, like Vicky said, and some of them try to overcompensate. They kind of guessed that they were in one of these Apollo teams. They tried to overcompensate by going, we're in one of these teams. What do we need to do to make sure that we don't come a cropper, we don't fulfill what people are expecting of us? But that didn't work either, did it, Vicky?
Not on the whole. No, there were a few exceptions, weren't there, with Apollo teams, and Meredith sort of talks about those in detail. But it was, I think, primarily where you had people who were sort of high on the critical thinking, but not on assertiveness scales, that they could sort of tolerate more those discussions within the team without it sort of descending into chaos. But also where you had a certain type of leader that was particularly able to deal with that kind of team. So there were a few exceptions, but on the whole, it was not a recipe for success.
Absolutely. Okay, so they had all of this data. They could look, and the teams were learning as they were going along. They were curious. They had that common goal. You could say this is part of it. They had a little bit of trust creeping in there. They had this goal that they wanted to win. They knew what was going on, so that they were looking at ways that they could improve as a team to be able to be one of those successful teams. It wasn't, so I think that's more reflection again, isn't it? Of it's not just an academic exercise. People were finding it useful. They got it. They understood it. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide here.
Yeah, I suppose the point is that, what was the outcome they were looking for? It wasn't just to necessarily identify what was going on. It was to be able to predict, and that's a sort of a step further. So yeah, I love this. Boldly or even recklessly, we made forecasts about the outcomes. This stage proved to be the most rewarding part of our work, since every faulty prediction told us something, and the company observers gave us a lead on why things had turned out differently from our expectations. So again, this sort of feedback loop that they had. However, it was already apparent that basis was developing for accurate predictions. They're going from being able to identify behaviour to being able to connect that to outcomes. And they were quite demanding of themselves, I think, the research team. They didn't just want to be able to pick out the winning team. They wanted to be able to rank those teams and to have a good idea of where they would finish, so that they could, again, it's this sort of scientific rigour. It's not just sort of coming up with a fix or an answer. It's actually can we make sure that we know and that what we're doing is useful, there's going to be an outcome.
I've just looked at the next slide, Vicky. I think we just need to put it up because I think it's just brilliant. So when they were looking at all of this, they were observing, they were beginning to get the idea that the seeds for these clusters of behaviours that they were needed for the team to be successful. And we'll talk about that in more detail at a future webinar. This is just really looking at those Apollo teams. But what they did find is that they at one point had a team of shapers. For those of you who aren't familiar with the terminology, the shapers are the challenging, driven, competitive, let's just get it done now types of behaviour. And they had them all within a team, and they'd sunk into a bad last place through extravagant overbidding and a failure to coordinate their plans effectively, and they resorted to desperate antics. These included securing a live pistol with a view to kidnapping the auctioneer, stealing money from the bank, followed by a demand for money for information received, and holding a member of the winning team hostage by brute force for the purpose of ransom. Do you know, I really wish I was there at Henley, because although this was scientific, although this was based on research, etc., it sounds like they were quite enjoying it, actually.
Absolutely. And I think, when Meredith's talking about, that you couldn't necessarily control the variables. I mean, that is just, you don't know when
How can you
you're going
control
to get
that?
a rogue team of shapers turning up. But yeah, I love that. And I think it tells us something about, as you say, Jo, about the that sort of environment. And I think that determination to win. But happily, I think that also fed into their sort of understanding of the behaviours at play and the outcomes. That sort of that need to win and that competitive edge.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we talk about forecasts, and that's something that Meredith and his team looked at doing. And they did this in many different ways, and they changed the way that they forecast throughout the years that they worked at Henley. But what they were interested in is, could they, with the data, this is the big data bit, could they predict? So the data itself was the 16PF, remember, the Watson-Glaser critical thinking analysis, the PPQ looking at values, and also this Bales analysis, these sheets and sheets and sheets of paper that were observing 7 different characteristics and things that were happening whilst these games were playing. Could they use this big data to predict how a team was going to work, how successful they were going to be? So they looked at this data, and they put their predictions in sealed envelopes, only to be opened at the end of the game, and then compared to the reality, what happened. Vicky, over to you.
So this is one of the this is an old graph, as you can see, but I sort of love it for that. So this is one of the examples of their prediction. Obviously, they've got these financial results, which are quite a solid performance measure at the end of the simulation, and we've got the prediction and then the final result. And this was just a session in 1976, but obviously this is something that's repeated. And you can see there the company. You do have the outliers, but you can see general trend there in terms of the predictions. And again, I love that that idea that when something was different to their prediction, they had the observers there to sort of talk about why that might have been. And Meredith talks about some of the reasons why things might turn out differently, like some of the things we've talked about, self-awareness, and having a certain type of manager that was particularly suitable for that team. But broadly speaking, what they were finding was that they could predict where teams finished up by looking at the behaviours and taking it back to McKinsey. That's what they're talking about, that we move away from looking at sort of individual top performers, and we look at these sort of drivers for team performance and team health, and that the behaviours that we have present in the team are absolutely key to that. And that's what Meredith found, and that's what we've been saying, isn't it, Jo, for some time?
Yeah, absolutely. But they continue to learn. And I think that's the key thing as well, isn't it? When the envelopes were opened, when they compared and contrast, that informed the work that they did going forwards. But also they made sure that the teams learnt from each other. So it wasn't just for a scientific benefit. It was a case of, right, let's explore what did go right, what did go wrong, why are you first, why are you last? And they did this all together so that all of the teams could benefit from it. Because basically, they were guinea pigs. They were guinea pigs throughout this course that they were on, to become better managers. And so something, they had to have a return on that as well. So there was a lot of learning, a lot of understanding, which was developed throughout alongside the scientific bit as well.
Yeah. And I think that's quite important if we go back to what McKinsey was saying, is sort of addressing this problem. One of the issues is sort of relying on intuition rather than having the data, on team behaviour. But another problem is that we sometimes look for superficial fixes, whereas actually what we need is this understanding. It's for teams to be sort of seeking out this information, seeking to understand themselves and one another better, but also having this iterative process, which we've seen used to really good effect.
Yeah.
That you get to know the strengths in the team and you reflect when things go wrong. And that's what these teams were doing, in that it's not enough just to have, something where you go in for a day. And we've seen this, haven't we, Jo? That,
time and time
with
again.
a lot of, you can't sort of go in and sort of pull everything apart and fix it all in a day. You need something, and I think this is the point that they were reaching, honing this tool that could be used within organisations, that people could sort of revisit and use to sort of understand on a day-to-day basis what's going wrong, what do we have, what don't we have. And going back to that point right at the beginning that we mentioned, Anthony J, that teams can regenerate, and that when you bring new people in, things change. So it isn't a fixed thing. It's something that needs to be worked on, and we need to kind of cultivate our understanding of the team and why it is. Why it succeeds, and I think that's where Belbin comes in, is helping with that understanding, but also, and perhaps we haven't kind of touched on this enough, but it's starting from a team standpoint. This was research into teams, so teams is in Belbin's DNA. So although the personality measures were there to give an initial idea of how they might sort of start the research, this was about beginning with the team. And when we look at other kind of tests and other sort of measures, I think we need to be guarded when we're looking at team performance. That if we're starting with individual personalities, then what we're putting together, if we try and extrapolate that into a team tool, is sort of like an amalgamated sort of team personality that's trying to sort of take all of those individual personalities into account. What Belbin does, it starts with the needs of the team, and the team roles that he identified, that Meredith and his team identified, are contributions of ways of meeting that need that the team has, ways of it achieving its purpose and its outcomes.
Couldn't put it better myself, Vicky. Absolutely, it's
I'll give you a
teams which are
specialist wander.
fundamental.
Sorry, you said that I would, and I did. I did a little wander off topic there.
No, please go for it. Let's embrace our team, our strengths. So it came to a point where Meredith's team could predict the performance. They were getting lots of data, this big data. They looked at the Apollo teams. They started coming up with new hypotheses, and we could keep talking for hours and hours and take you through each of those until those 9 clusters of behaviour identified, those 9 team roles. But we've only got a few more minutes left with you, and this kind of happened as well at Henley, is that they were there for over 9 years, and after a while they realized that they had outstayed their welcome somewhat, and they needed really to put what they had learnt into management, into industry, into businesses. They realized that the moment for their departure had arrived. It wasn't new anymore. It wasn't shiny. People kind of knew what to expect. But what they did then is that, because Henley had a sister college in Australia, they then did 3 tours of Australia, and they repeated this. So again, going back to that scientific part of it, they weren't just happy with this one cohort from Henley. They went over and they repeated it again and again to get more and more data.
I love this from a team role point of view as well, because as a high implementer, like I find it hard to identify with this. The last experiment on our joint program of work with Henley in composing management teams was sober and subdued. This seems to be what happens when wonder ceases, the expected comes to pass, and the moment for departure arrives. And I think that gives you again an idea of the minds of the people who were instigating this. Because for me, when the expected comes to pass, that's happy days. But for Meredith, it was like, okay, it's time to move on. We've found, we've done what we came here to do. And that's the point at which Ashay says that sort of consolidation happens. But I think, looking at understanding where that team was sort of focused and where they come from, it makes perfect sense. And I think, that was a sort of point of closure, wasn't it?
Absolutely. But then linking back to the Industrial Training Research Unit, what it was there to do, it was to make that link. I've lost my bit of paper now. It was providing the link from research to business consultancy. So they'd done the research, they'd repeated it in Australia, but then what they wanted to do is to keep that link there. This is what it was about. It was about linking what they'd learnt in the research capacity and linking that with performance outcomes. So after after they finished that, they then put them to use. This is what the Industrial Training Research Unit was there for, and they immediately found application. And I like this because it wasn't just within management teams, it was within project teams, R&D teams, project development teams. They put the research to good use and straight out into business.
Yeah, because once they have the confidence in what they found, that's the sort of the natural next step.
Absolutely. So they still hadn't come up with Belbin team roles as a product yet, but they knew that it had a use after all of the research that was carried out. And it was only later that they realized, actually, this is so useful to industry. This is so useful to business. What can we provide them with that's going to give them the tools and the understanding so they don't need these management consultants in? They can actually empower themselves to be able to look at this. And how can we help trainers? How can we help L&D? How can we help independent management consultants also to be able to impart this information so that teams can start making a real impact on the sustainable business performance? But it started with teams and it started with this research. Vicky, anything else that you'd like to add at this juncture?
So much, but I wonder if there are any questions or things that we might not have covered or that you'd like us to talk more about. I think just to say that I think as we touched on that, management teams is an incredibly rich read, and I think it's just really useful to know when you're looking at the framework to understand where it's come from. Because as I say that there are lots of sort of tests on the market, and there are lots of things available. But I think when you understand where Belbin began, then you understand why it works in the way that it does. And it was, as you say, Joe, it was originally designed. The research question was around why some teams succeed and others fail. And I think all of the research design that happened subsequently was in pursuit of that, and not necessarily with a particular end goal in mind, but just really focusing on being led by the data and focusing on where that took them. And that is a thread throughout all of the research. And it's still, I think, the way that we operate, it's still incredibly important to us. That what we are doing and the data that we're providing really helps teams on the ground. And it's not just a tick box exercise. It's not just something that you do for a day and then forget about, but it's actually about understanding the way that teams work and actually applying that to the work that you're doing as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Vicky. So we started really with the McKinsey article, didn't we? And they were talking about team effectiveness as less art and more science. They talk about the myth that teams should ideally be stacked with top talent in every role to achieve maximum effectiveness. And hopefully what we've done over the last 50 minutes or so is actually said, absolutely, McKinsey, we agree. But here is the science behind why. This is the research that took years to do, and many, many teams, hundreds of teams, to be able to agree, absolutely, that is a myth. Apollo teams aren't the most successful. It's not about intellect. And what we've explored really is looking at the setup of the research, the big data that was involved there, the types of data they had, the type of scientists, the types of brains and curious minds that they had, which ultimately culminated in Belbin team roles. Now, next time we meet, next month for our webinar, we're going to be taking it a step further because McKinsey start talking about 4 particular factors that are critical to successful teams. And again, we're going to be going, yeah, absolutely. And here is the science, here is the research, here is how Belbin actually proves what it is that they are coming up with. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in. Oh, excellent, Tracy. Thank you. Hi, Rob. I guess the question is, how do you really measure team success? Is it really only that they attain the goal, or is it the way in which they get there? Oh, that's a good question, of which I don't think there's a simple answer, because I think success depends on the organisation and who's measuring it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think in terms of what, in the context of the McKinsey article, they decided to define team effectiveness as the collective capacity to sustainably deliver results. Now, obviously, what those results are is sort of up for discussion, but I think sustainably is quite a key word there, and collective capacity. That it's actually the focus on the team rather than the individual, but also sustainably deliver results. It's not, this is again not a sort of a quick intervention, but this is actually, looking at the whole structure of the team and it having sort of being an organism that's sort of aware of itself and is able to, and that we're able to adapt, and the team is able to take steps to play to its strengths, to manage weaknesses, to create those networks within the team so that strengths can be drawn upon at the right time. Sorry, that's a bit of a politician's answer to measuring team success, but it is at least where McKinsey start. But I think that's a valid question in its own right, that that you can have so many. It's not always profit. It's not always like a financial outcome, is it?
No. And I think there's so much research. I'm starting now. It's what's one of my favorite books? And they talk about team success being the fact that teams are truly self-managing. Katzenbach and Smith. And that could be a measure, couldn't it? That the fact that the team becomes leaderless because it becomes such a autonomous being and able to understand and flex and adapt depending on the environment around it. One could argue that that is what a successful team is, but it needs to link with the business outcomes and what's already there. We need to understand why the team is put together. Oh, hi, Aidan. Absolutely. We need to know what the purpose is to be able to measure it, because if we don't know what the point of the team is, how can we decide whether or not it's got there in the first place? So, gosh, that's a whole new webinar, I think. Let's look at that at some point. So,
yeah, we did have a slide about that, Aidan, but I think Joe was worried I was going to go off into a second webinar about purpose. But you're absolutely right.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
think understanding the purpose of the team, absolutely key. And obviously that was something that was determined in the research, that they had sort of predetermined that. But yes, in actuality, measuring a team's success against, as Joe says, what it's there to do.
Absolutely. Why some teams succeed and others fail, a discussion, or if you wanted to, it could be a reading project, management teams, why they succeed or fail, available in all good bookshops. There's plenty of information we have on our website. We'll be sending you all the links to everything that we've discussed on the email that's going to follow this. We're meeting up again, hopefully, with you all and more. Tell your friends. When we're looking at this McKinsey article again in more depth, to really look at the research that underpins teamwork, the effectiveness of it, and Belbin. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for the last hour. Please do contact us. Please do ask questions. Be curious. We hope to see you again very soon. And of course, if any of you are in London next week, come and see us at the World of Learning, where we will be there to answer all of your questions actually face to face. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great rest of the afternoon. And Vicky, thank you.
Thank you.